The ribbon cutting felt like a parade thrown on my front porch. A brass band that no one hired hammered out a march. A council member practiced the smile he used on campaign mailers. A developer in a steel gray suit held 2 feet of ceremonial scissors. And on a banner pinned to aluminum truss, I read the name like a practical joke: Town Commons at Walnut Run. Walnut Run was my creek, my pasture, my boundary marker in the original meets and bounds. The commons, by every recorded definition that mattered, were mine. I stood 5 rows back in a borrowed blazer with the deed folded in my inside pocket, the paper soft at the creases from 100 rereads. When the ribbon fell and the applause rose, I clapped with everyone else. I didn't march down the center aisle. Not yet. I had spent a year letting them build on what the county said didn't exist and what my grandfather's survey said never went away. A year of almost there, a year of concrete and meetings and drones and maps marked up in red. I let them pour slabs and frame steel. I let them trench lines and pull permits. I let them finish because timing was leverage, and finish meant value, and value meant the conversation wouldn't end with a shrug and a misdemeanor trespass sign driven into my own dirt. It didn't start with a ribbon. It started with a yellow sign staked in the side of the road like a warning for a storm. Zoning hearing, proposed mixed-use development. I almost missed it, the way you miss a new freckle in the mirror. Then trucks came. Then men in vests set orange flags in a straight line that wasn't straight on my maps. The first letter from the HOA floated in like a paper airplane. Exciting new retail and community amenities coming soon. It wasn't a request. It was a toll. The second letter was a notice of construction impact. The third was a reminder about overnight street parking during this exciting transition. Somewhere around letter 4, a neighbor asked if I'd seen the site plan. I hadn't been invited to any planning meeting. I bought coffee for the city clerk, and she let me flip through a binder as thick as a family Bible. The plan was precise, glossy. 12 buildings, a plaza, a splash pad. The boundary line that cut across my south field ran dead center through Building 7. Like a truth that didn't care how pretty the rendering looked. You'd think the next part would be shouting and chain locks and a reporter shoved in front of a camera. I went quiet instead. I called a surveyor who still signs plats by hand. He walked the property with the tripod and a patience I learned to appreciate. We found the same iron rods my grandfather set, deep beneath a foot of thatch, and 2 cedar posts he'd scribed on in 1979. I ordered a title search from a firm that doesn't lose files. They traced the land like a family tree back to the patent. There had been no sale, no dedication, no recorded easement, no lot line adjustment, and no condemnation. If the county wanted an easement, they'd never asked. If the HOA wanted an easement, they didn't have the power to grant it. What they had was confidence and momentum. What I had was paper and time. The HOA president laughed when I asked for the encroachment documents. Not to my face, but I could hear it in the email. She wrote that the board had partnered with our trusted developer to deliver generational value, and that small boundary adjustments typical of modern surveying are between the developer and the city. I asked for the recorded plat. She sent a brochure. I asked for the meeting minutes where the board agreed to support the project. She sent an invitation to the groundbreaking. I stopped asking her and started asking the people who stamped things. The planning director knew me by my second voicemail. I filed a public records request for every drawing, every revision, every note. I read them all at my kitchen table with 2 highlighters and a slow anger I measured like rain in a gauge. Meanwhile, a constellation of rebar grew where my field met Walnut Run. Piles of concrete forms appeared like teeth. A backhoe scooped a trench that would carry fiber and water. My friends asked why I didn't go stand in the trench. Because an injunction requires a judge, and judges require facts, and facts are best delivered complete. Because if I stood in a trench today, they'd step around me tomorrow. Because if I forced a stop, they'd claim damages for delay. Because the strongest bargaining position comes after certainty and before complacency. Let them finish, my lawyer said, voice careful. Finish means they need you more than you need them. He explained it without drama. Ejectment, trespass, quiet title, injunctive relief, damages measured by fair rental value and harm to use and enjoyment. He explained leverage. Completed buildings anchored in your soil are a problem they can't move with a forklift. He explained risk. Adverse possession isn't magic, not against a recorded owner who objects, and certainly not in 12 months. but sloppiness has a way of creating stories judges don't like. Object, document, don't obstruct, he said. Then, when the world can see what they did, step out into the light. So, I objected. In writing, every month. I sent letters by certified mail to the developer, the city, and the HOA. I kept a notebook of dates, truck numbers, company names, and conversations. I flew a drone once a week and stitched the footage into a time-lapse that turned steel into a flower blooming on a map labeled with my name. I put a copy of the deed in a fireproof box, and a copy in my lawyer's file, and a copy with my mother, because paranoia and prudence are cousins. I started showing up at HOA meetings. I spoke during the 3 minutes they allow for homeowners, and when I asked why the board was cheerleading something built partly on a parcel the board didn't control, people shifted in folding chairs. The president said the board never gets in the way of progress. I said progress was a word that often forgets to send a thank you note. The developer, whose name I leave off because litigation favors precision, treated me like a speed bump painted with a smile. At a pre-construction meeting, he called my deed antiquated, as if recording dates lose weight like old coins. When I showed him the survey, he said his survey differed, and when I asked to see it, his project manager said it was in process. Weeks later, they filed a plat that nudged my line 5 feet here and 12 feet there, with a legend that said, field fit. It was recorded, which is to say, the clerk stamped it after the city approved it, after the planning commission nodded, after the developer's lawyer assured them adjacent owners have been notified. I had been notified by the backhoe. My objection letter became a binder. My binder became a calendar. December brought roof trusses and fa la la from a radio in a trucker's truck. January brought glass. February brought a meeting with the city manager, who said his office relies on licensed professionals and good faith. I said I had both, and still, here we were. By spring, the 12 buildings were a row of teeth biting my boundary. Tenants were rumored, leases drafted, grand openings planned. The HOA posted photos with captions about our shared future. Residents left comments with heart emojis and questions about parking. I didn't post. I didn't warn. I didn't tip my hand or wave my deed in a plaza. I waited. A kind of patience that felt like holding my breath at the bottom of a pool. The week before ribbon cutting, I met my lawyer in a conference room with bad art. We rehearsed the filing we would drop if they ignored me after I spoke. We numbered exhibits. We chose the simplest words. We wrote the sentence that matters more than any speech. Plaintiff is the fee simple owner of the property described in Exhibit A. When the day came, I stood in row 5 and clapped with everyone else. They cut the ribbon, they tossed confetti. A kid grabbed a cupcake from a tray, and frosting smeared his cheek. I stepped out of the crowd, walked to the edge of the stage, and waited for Gray's suit to finish his thank yous. "Excuse me," I said, voice level, not loud. "Congratulations. Before you hand over the keys to Building 7, you should see what it's built on." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded paper that had outlived 3 generations. The deed looked small in my hand, but it was the heaviest thing I'd ever held.
For a beat, the only sound was the band winding down into an awkward half note. Gray's suit blinked at me like I'd held up a fish. The council member's smile stayed where it was, but the rest of his face fell. The HOA president stepped forward, hand already raised in a stop sign, as if etiquette could fix geometry. I didn't look at any of them. I was looking at the paper, at my grandfather's looping script on the back, where he'd written dates of taxes paid like it was a journal. Then I looked up, found the eyes of the city manager near the podium, and spoke the way my lawyer told me to, 1 brick at a time. I said my name, I said my parcel number, I said the legal description like a line of poetry I didn't enjoy but respected. I said the survey was completed on these dates by this licensed professional. I said certified letters were sent on these dates to these parties. I said the encroachment measured as shown on Exhibit 3, 18 feet through the north wall of Building 7, 9 feet kissing the loading dock of Building 8, and a sliver beneath the plaza slab poured last April. I said I'd love to step aside and let the cupcakes continue, but after a year of patience, this was the right time and place to tell the truth. Then I unfolded the deed fully and held it out with both hands the way a staggers runner offers the baton. Gray's suit recovered first. He took 1 step, then another, and plucked the deed from my hand with fingers that didn't want to touch it. "Sir," he said into the mic, voice warm enough for TV, "I understand this is an emotional day, but our team has worked closely with the city, the HOA, and licensed surveyors to ensure every inch of this project is compliant. If you have a concern, please bring it to our office." "Your office has my letters," I said, still level. "Certified returned green cards signed by your receptionist on the 9th, the 20th, and the 2nd. The city has my letters. The HOA has my letters. I brought copies today." I held up a manila envelope thick enough to be a paperback and set it on the edge of the stage. "One for you, one for the city, one for the press if they're here." They were. Phones lifted like a field of sunflowers. A camera on a tripod pivoted and the red light glowed. The band pretended to fuss with cases. The HOA president found the microphone faster than the council member. "We won't be derailed by misinformation," she said. "Our homeowners voted overwhelmingly to support this project and—" "Show me the vote," a voice called from the crowd. It was Tom from 3 Doors Down, who hangs flags for every branch of service on Memorial Day, whether you like it or not. "Show us the minutes!" I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just breathed. Gray Suit gestured to someone offstage, and a man in a crisp Oxford appeared with a black binder so shiny it reflected the bunting. "We are confident in our approvals," he said, "and we trust our partners at the city." The city manager took that as his cue. He stepped to the mic with the weary professionalism of a man who goes home to a migraine. "There are processes for resolving boundary disputes," he said. Eyes on me, voice for the group. "We encourage all parties to use the courts and not the court of public opinion." He looked at me like he wanted me to join him for coffee and for me to disappear. "I will," I said. "By close of business today, my attorney will file a complaint for ejectment, trespass, and to quiet title, and we'll record a lis pendens to give your lender notice. We'll seek injunctive relief as to Building 7, 8, and the plaza slab. Before that happens, we can talk. 3 paths, as simple as I can make them." I held up a finger. 1. You buy the encroached strip at fair market value of completed commercial frontage, plus my fees, plus the months you've used it. 2. You lease it on a ground lease at a rent that reflects exactly what you built on my dirt, 25 years with escalators, and we paper it like adults. 3. You remove your improvements from my land and restore my property. I let the math of removal hang in the air like a sudden wind. Gray Suit's smile did a small involuntary thing. He knew option 3 cost it kingdom. He knew option 1 would make his pro forma sweat. He knew option 2 was a choke collar he'd wear for a generation. He also knew the 4th option, pretend I wasn't there, died the minute the cameras rolled. The HOA president leaned into the mic again, brittle. "This is not appropriate." "It is. It's appropriate to tell the truth where the harm is. It's appropriate to fix harm with fairness. I objected for a year. I didn't block trucks. I didn't pull stakes in the night. I let you finish because the only thing I wanted more than a good outcome was a clear record. Now we have both, a finished project and a record of how it landed on someone else's fee simple." A murmur rolled through the crowd like a tide. A woman I didn't know asked her husband, loud enough for 3 rows, "Can they build on someone's land?" He said, "Not legally." Someone behind me whispered, "He's the one with the drones," and I wondered who told them and decided I didn't mind. Gray Suit switched tactics. He said, "We are committed to the community." Words slow, like he'd typed them before. "We'll review Mr. Harper's concerns promptly and respond through proper channels. In the meantime, let's celebrate this incredible addition to Walnut." "It's called leverage," my lawyer told me, in the beige conference room when the carpet pattern looked like the mind of a committee. "You don't have to win the press conference, you just have to make the lender pick up the phone." We had prepared a packet for this moment. I pulled 3 more envelopes from inside my blazer and handed them off. City manager, Gray Suit, journalist with the tripod. Each envelope contained the survey overlay, with meets and bounds plotted against the as-built, objection letters with stamps, certified mail receipts, and a summary page with bullet points polite enough to be read at a public meeting and sharp enough to cut. The council member said something about partnership. The band started up again with a march in a different key. The cupcakes moved faster, like sugar could sweeten a boundary. I stepped back into the crowd. A neighbor touched my elbow and whispered, "You're brave." I wanted to say, "Bravery is just fear with homework." I said thank you instead, because this was a day for simple sentences. By late afternoon, the emails began.
Gray Suit's counsel asked for a meeting to better understand your position. The city attorney acknowledged receipt and recited neutrality. The HOA president sent a mass email about noise in the media and staying positive. My lawyer filed the complaint at 3:17 p.m., timestamped and recorded the list pendens at 3:42 p.m., book and page flashing back in a text like coordinates. At 4:05 p.m., a reporter called. At 4:12 p.m., a bank I'd never spoken to did. This is how leverage sounds. A lender wondering why their collateral has a cloud over title. This is how it looks. A title insurer scheduling a reserved conference room. This is how it feels. The current of a river you've been wading against suddenly turning in your favor. That evening, my porch light caught a dozen moths and one developer's project manager. He stood on my steps with 2 coffees and a face that had lost some color. "Can we talk?" he asked. I said, "Sure." We sat on the top steps like neighbors and not like combatants. He said everything you'd expect: pride in the project, commitment to the city, surprise at my timing, frustration that I hadn't given him a chance to fix it quietly. I slid the stack of green return receipt cards across the space between us like a deck of proof. He sighed, the sound of someone who wished the past 12 months were a different shape. "This is salvageable," he said. "We can buy the strip. Quickly." Quickly looks one way to you. To me, it looks like accuracy and fairness and no handshakes in hallways. You'll need to pay for what you built on, for the time you used it, and for the cost you pushed onto me by ignoring what you didn't want to see. And the lease terms for the slab under the plaza? Those live longer than anyone on your LinkedIn page. He smiled despite himself. "You really did your homework." I had a year, and a reason. He asked what would make me whole. I didn't answer with a number. I answered with a principle. No one should have to chain themselves to a backhoe to protect what a piece of paper already protects. The law is boring until someone treats it like an obstacle instead of a boundary. Then it gets interesting. Then it gets expensive. He left with empty cups and the line of a deal drawn in pencil. My phone buzzed with text from neighbors, and my mother called even though she had promised not to until morning. I stood on the porch and looked out at the row of lit windows across the creek, at Building 7 glowing like a lantern sitting an inch over the line, and I thought of my grandfather setting cedar posts with a sledge and a thermos of coffee, marking a world that men in suits would pretend to forget. I'd let them forget for a year. Now I would help them remember.
The next morning began with a calendar that looked like a chessboard. 9 a.m., emergency call with the lender's outside counsel. 10:30, status with my lawyer to prep for the injunction hearing. Noon, a meeting request from the title insurer's claims department, polite, urgent, to facilitate a path forward. At 1:15, a voicemail from the building official I'd never met in my life until yesterday, asking if we could clarify a boundary matter that may impact issuance of certificates of occupancy. This is what leverage does. It pulls people who are certain into rooms where they ask questions with the edges sanded off. At 9, the lender's counsel led with civility polished by habit. "We're stakeholders now," she said, "and stakeholders prefer clarity." I said clarity lived in the title report and the county records and the survey pens, not in brochures. My lawyer spoke the language lenders understand: clouded title, risk allocation, collateral impairment, diminution of value. We didn't posture, we sent the exhibits. On the other end of the line, someone muted to whisper to someone else. When the line came back, they asked what remedy would cure the defect. My lawyer gave them the 3 options again, this time in numbers and nouns: purchase of an approximate X-foot strip at frontage market, ground lease at annual rent indexed to CPI with resets, or removal and restoration. "We assume option 3 is not practical," the lender's counsel said. "Assume correctly," my lawyer said, "but it remains available." The injunction hearing at 10 was not a TV drama. No gavel theatrics, just a tired judge in a neat shirt, a docket that ran like a conveyor belt, and a handful of lawyers who know how much emotion the law permits before it stops listening. We were first up. My lawyer was concise. He showed the deed, the survey overlay, the certified letters. The developer's counsel argued laches and balance of equities. Too late, too disruptive, too close to opening. The city attorney asked the court to avoid an order that punished tenants and consumers. The judge leaned back and asked the only question that matters: who owns it? There was no answer but the one in Exhibit A. The order wasn't everything we asked for, but it was enough. No certificates of occupancy for Buildings 7 and 8, or for the slabbed plaza until further order. No leasing, no tenant improvements beyond what's already done, no celebratory occupancy under a temporary sign-off, and an instruction that the parties mediate within 14 days. The judge set a status conference in 3 weeks and wished us good luck like he meant it. By lunchtime, the HOA president had sent an email with the subject line, "Community Resilience." It accused certain parties of grandstanding and encouraged patience while our partners resolved technical matters. And the comments under the post on the neighborhood forum, residents didn't clap. They asked for the vote. They asked who authorized cheerleading a project the HOI didn't control. Someone pasted a link to the meeting minutes and circled the blank where the vote should be. The word recall appeared, not in all caps, but enough times to matter. I hadn't intended to become the fulcrum for HOA politics. It turns out sunlight doesn't pick only the weeds you hoped for. The title insurer's conference call at noon felt like surgery planning. They wanted to see everything. We sent everything. They wanted to understand whether this was a fence line fight or a systemic encroachment. We told them 19 feet was not a rounding error. They wanted to know whether notice was given. We showed the green cards like a magician turning over clean palms. They asked, quietly, whether we would consider a global resolution that included a release, an easement, and an indemnity. My lawyer said the word easement tasted nicer when it came with rent. That afternoon, the building official called to say something that sounded like an apology, delivered sideways. He said we rely on professional submissions. We don't survey lines. I said I didn't expect him to. I said I appreciated the pause. He said the pause would stay until the court moved or the parties resolved. Off the record, he added, that was a hell of a move. I told him off the record my grandfather would have preferred a hell of a handshake 20 months earlier. Negotiations began like negotiations do. The developer offered a purchase price that pretended my boundary was vacant land and not the foundation under fully leased frontage. We countered with a number that treated the strip like the most valuable square feet in town, the land under revenue, not grass. They countered with a ground rent that would have been cute under a park bench. We answered with a rent that would make an asset manager put down his pen and look out a window. We added back rent from the day the slab cured, escalations, and a clause that ratcheted if retail sales crossed agreed thresholds. We demanded recorded non-exclusive easements for utilities, access, and maintenance, drafted broadly enough to avoid midnight phone calls in January. We asked for an indemnity that kept me out of the crosshairs when a tenant tripped over an espresso machine. We asked for fees. We asked for a public acknowledgement so the story wouldn't rewrite itself in the HOA newsletter as a misunderstanding. They asked for confidentiality. We said we'd keep numbers quiet, not principles. We hired an MAI appraiser to value land as built, not as imagined. They hired two. We agreed on a neutral third if our numbers lived on different planets. We scheduled a site walk with all the professionals who had ever held a tape measure within a mile of Walnut Run. The surveyors shook hands like chess opponents. The plat overlay went down on the hood of a truck, and everyone nodded at the line like it was a stubborn river. While the math churned, the HOA held an emergency executive session to discuss legal matters. The neighborhood held an informal session at the pizza place to discuss everything else. I sat in a booth with neighbors I'd only waved to for years and listened. People were kind. People were angry. People were funny in the way people get when they realize the absurdity they've lived under has a name and a face. Bravery is fear with homework, I said finally, and Tom wrote it on a napkin like a motto. The press found a rhythm in the story. Little guy with a big deed, developer with a big project, city caught between process and fact. I stayed on script. I said I didn't hate development. I said I liked coffee shops and dog water bowls and light in windows. I said I disliked the idea that a recorded line is negotiable only after it's crossed. I said I wanted a fair deal, not a larger spotlight.
On the fourth day, the Lenders Council asked to meet in person. We sat in a conference room that smelled like lemon and caution. The developer, the lender, the title insurer, the city's lawyer, me. Introductions first, then a slide titled Paths to Resolution. I could tell which bullet points were theirs and which were ours by the font. We moved quickly. Buy it at X, lease it at Y, remove it at Z. Nobody mentioned Z after the first slide. When the talk got granular, it felt like haggling over a set of gears. What's the rent step at year 5? What's the cure period if a tenant needs to trench? What's the definition of gross sales for the rent kicker? Who maintains the slab? Who paints the stripe where my land ends and the rest begins? What happens if a new survey says the line is a whisper different? When does back rent start and how does it escalate? How do we describe the condo map carve-out so lenders stop breathing like they're running stairs? We broke at dusk with outlines, not signatures. Back on my porch, the moths were back, and so was the project manager, this time without coffee. He looked younger than the day before, like leverage is a clock that runs faster on some faces. I think we can get there, he said. I do too, I said, not because you deserve mercy, but because I prefer civility. He nodded. You won't go on TV again, will you? He asked, and I smiled. If we finish like grown-ups, I won't need to. I slept for the first time in a week. In my dream, my grandfather was setting cedar posts, and when he looked up, the posts were steel columns holding up glass, and he didn't look angry. He looked like he'd expected me to do the rest of the job.